A pleasant day once again to all grade 11 students of the Angeles City National Trade School Senior High School. Welcome to week 3 of your classes in Oral Communication and Context, and I'm your teacher in OCC, Mr. Reggie A. Bonifacio. For the past 2 weeks of our classes, you already learned about the basic definition of communication, its processes, elements, and nature. Last week, I taught you 4 models of communication that helped you understand better the communicative process. For this week, we will be dealing with the possible problems that may occur whenever we are talking or conversing with a person or a group of persons. What are the causes of these problems that may lead to an ineffective communication process? And of course, what can we do? What are the key strategies to prevent these problems from happening? So join me in our week 3 classes in OCC entitled Communication Breakdown. And so my dear students, for week 3 of OCC, everything that you will learn is all about communication breakdown. You will learn about its definition and what are the possible causes for communication to break down. You will also be learning the strategies to avoid and to prevent communication breakdown from happening, and what are the basic features, the 7 C's of an effective communication process. We begin our discussion for this week by looking at Day 1 of Cherik's online class in OCC. My dear students, I am giving you 20 seconds to look at the entirety of this picture and observe what's happening. And now we will be answering 5 questions that are related to this picture. We begin with the first question. What have you observed in the image? So obviously, you can see that Cherik is attending an online class, most probably in OCC, using his laptop or computer. But instead of focusing on his classes, apparently Cherik is listening to very loud music. And because of this, his mom is trying to tell him something. Most probably she is telling Cherik to, "What are you doing? Why are you not attending your classes?" And Cherik, since the music that he's listening to is very loud, he doesn't seem to notice, and he doesn't know, and he doesn't hear what his mom is telling her. For question number 2, who is the speaker and who is the receiver in this scenario? Cherik's mom is a speaker since she is trying to tell Cherik something, and the receiver is Cherik. But obvious from this picture, Cherik did not hear or doesn't even know that his mom is telling him something. For question number 3, do you think they have understood each other? Obviously, the answer is a big no. For the 4th question, my dear students, do you think there is a breakdown? Is there a breakdown in the flow of communication in the image? If your answer is a big yes, your answer is correct. And for the final question, what factors are present in the image that hinders the smooth flow of communication? Let's try to enumerate them. First, Cherik is using his headset or earphones, listening to very loud music. That's why he cannot hear what his mom is telling him. Cherik is also preoccupied looking at the screen of his laptop or computer. That's why he didn't even notice that his mom is already inside his room telling him something. Now, based from our activity, I'm sure that you, my dear students, already have an idea or a glimpse of what communication breakdown is. But before we begin with our formal discussion of the topic, I want you to remember some important points. Communication is successful if and only if the messages sent by the sender are understood in the same sense by the receiver. If any kind of disturbance blocks any step of communication, the message will be misunderstood and communication will be unsuccessful. Hence, communication breakdown happens. Now, what is communication breakdown? As defined by Emily Rogers in her online article, communication breakdown is a failure to exchange information, resulting in a lack of communication. So basically, in communication breakdown, there is a problem in the process of communication. There is something or there was something that impeded or blocked or served as an obstacle or hindrance to proper and effective communication. So what happens when there is communication breakdown? The sender and the receiver cannot understand each other. The message sent by the sender was not properly received and was not properly interpreted by the receiver. So therefore, there is no proper and there is ineffective communication. Another question is, what causes communication to break down? And the answer is one of the basic elements of communication, and you already know this. It is barrier or noise. Barrier or noise are factors that affect, impede, or obstruct the normal flow of effective communication. Because of barrier or noise, communication may not truly happen, and communication may become ineffective and problematic. And now that we know that barriers or noise are the most common cause of communication breakdown, we have to identify the three types or three categories of barriers or noise. We have number 1, physical barriers, number 2, emotional barriers, and number 3, linguistic barriers. Physical barriers refer to environmental and physical factors such as actual noise or poor internet and phone connections. For instance, a student is trying to connect to the internet for an online class, but the internet connection is very slow and unstable due to the heavy downpour of rain. Thus, the presence of natural calamities such as a typhoon results in an unreliable internet transmission that in turn hinders successful communication between the student and his or her classmates and teachers. Next up are emotional barriers. Examples of emotional barriers are feelings of distrust, fear or anxiety, or even lack of self-confidence or extreme emotions. As an example, if a student fears his or her teacher so much, he or she might be afraid to ask questions or even talk in the class. Likewise, extreme emotions may also cause someone to be negative and close-minded in receiving a message from a certain sender or person, thus giving a negative impact on communication. For an instance, if the receiver is feeling upset or angry toward the receiver, he or she may take the message negatively, unlike if she is feeling positive emotions like happiness, confidence, or affection towards the sender. In here, communication would also be interpreted positively. And the last type of barrier are linguistic barriers, which are hindrances to communication that emerge due to language choice and use. A perfect example of a linguistic barrier is the use of jargons. Jargons are technical terms or a special set of vocabulary used in a certain field or profession. To illustrate that, a misunderstanding between a doctor and a patient will happen if the doctor will use jargon such as ACE2 or antigen and immunosuppressed in explaining the nature and threat of COVID-19 to a patient who does not belong to the same field, which is medicine. Knowing that barriers or noise are the primary causes of communication breakdown, the question is, how can we avoid or prevent communication breakdown from happening? Here are 5 basic tips. The first one is always use simple language. The use of simple and clear words should always be practiced and emphasized. The clearer the word and the more simple the words or language that we use, the better that our listener or audience would understand our message. Tip number 2 is to reduce or eliminate noise levels. To identify the source of noise and eliminate that source is always very important. It is also essential to study the frequent cause of the disturbance and find a solution for it. For example, you are talking with a person in a noisy room. You can avoid it by respectfully asking someone to minimize the volume, whether that person is the source of the noise, or by looking for another place that is quiet or appropriate for your conversation. Let's now move on to our third tip. Tip number 3 is listen actively. Always listen actively, attentively, and sensibly. Now, there is a difference between active listening and hearing. Active listening means hearing with a proper understanding of the message that is heard, and we should always practice that. Our next tip is control emotions. The sender should not let extreme emotions affect communication, as the receiver might misinterpret the message being delivered. For example, if the sender is extremely upset, then the receiver might think that the information being delivered is not good. So always control your emotions. And our last tip, always give constructive feedback. In communication, feedback is always desired, and it ensures the sender that the message was delivered clearly and properly. In addition to these aforementioned strategies, it may be helpful to consider learning and applying the 7 features of effective communication, or the 7 C's of communication by Broom and Cutlip. The first C states that communication should be clear. Clearness in communication implies the use of simple and specific words to express ideas. The receiver should not have to read between the lines and make guesses on their own just to understand what you are trying to express. Next C, communication should be concise. Conciseness does not mean keeping the message short, but making it direct or straight to the point. Insignificant or redundant information should be eliminated from the communication that will be sent to the recipient. Third C, communication should be concrete. Effective communication happens when the message is concrete and supported by facts, figures, and real-life examples and situations. The receiver should have a crystal clear picture of what you are talking about. Next, communication should be correct. Correctness in grammar eliminates negative impact on the audience and increases the credibility and effectiveness of the message. Moreover, diction, meaning the choice of words, must fit the receiver's level of education or knowledge. Letter C, number 5, communication should be coherent. Coherence means that communication must be logical. All points are connected and relevant to one another. Moving on, communication should be complete. Communication should include everything that the receiver needs to hear for him or her to respond, react, or evaluate properly. If the receiver has every piece of information that he or she needs to know, then communication is complete. And the final C is communication should be courteous. The speaker shows courtesy in communication by respecting the culture, values, and beliefs of his or her receivers. Being courteous at all times creates a positive impact on the audience. Likewise, practice empathy or put yourself on someone's shoe or situation to deeply understand the other end. And now, my grade 11 students, let's have a quick recap of what you have learned today. We were able to discuss the definition of communication breakdown, and you learned what causes it, which is noise or barriers. You also learned the 3 types of barriers, namely physical, emotional, and linguistic barriers. I also gave you strategies on how to avoid this communication breakdown. And finally, in addition to those strategies, you learned, and I hope you will apply, the 7 C's of effective communication. And so, my dear grade 11 students, that ends our discussions for week 3 in oral communication in context. I hope that you learned a lot and that you enjoyed our discussion for this week. And despite all the difficulties that we have now in the new normal in education, remember that in the middle of these difficulties lies golden opportunities. Continue to learn and always be happy while learning. This has been your teacher once again, Mr. Reggie A. Bonifacio. Think positive and always stay COVID negative. Goodbye and good day.